Dear friends, welcome to the Mindful Maya podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to understanding the phenomenon of the mind and be free from its conditions. The series features various talk shows given by the mystic Maya around the world in what he calls the conversation from the silence to the silence.
Maya, as much as our body needs a rest, and we give the body the rest it requires, otherwise we can't go on functioning at all, right? If it would be in our power, it seems like we're all insomniacs. The people these days, we, the people these days, seem to be all insomniacs. We can't fall asleep. Or maybe, in a deeper way, the experiencer or the I, that calls I from all of us, within from all of us, that I somehow does not want to fall asleep, or simply there is no way for that I to fall asleep. But we don't have that kind of power, right? As much as we can extend ourselves, we can barely keep it up 48 hours straight. And either we'd go into override mode for the body, but we start losing our mind, make it 3 days, then we'll start to go crazy, because our brain needs to cut off from the general day-to-day reality in order to repair itself, in order to set new neurons connections. And if we are not able to do that, then this overriding, overclocking mode slowly makes us insane. We lose all the energy. We basically can't survive normally. We'd go crazy. And of course, this is what happens if we don't fall asleep. Now, just imagine what happens if the mind can't rest. There seems to be a different ways we can approach this. For example, we may like to think that resting of the mind is something we do naturally when we fall asleep. And that is a yes. The mind finds a bit of rest when we fall asleep, at least 2 hours, which is highly, highly needed, where almost all the conscious phenomenon in the mind ceases to be or somehow stops. And it is the absolute requirement for that to happen. And when we go to sleep, some of us go in this least active mode for the mind as a whole, somewhere between 3 to 5 or 3 to 7, 8. In this time frame, there is at least 2 hours where we absolutely need to go super unconscious. And if we can't go this super unconscious state, we wake up very tired, because dreaming all night is also actually a lot of phenomenon or a lot of processing happening in the mind. So in a way, we need this state of deep sleep to have a normal functioning day. But still, there are different things in life that we go through, which I like to call stories. And there are different stories we all go through, which we keep on carrying in the mind when we wake up the next day. Out of many details of one day's activity, we forget a lot of them. Nevertheless, we carry some of the details, which becomes our reality, which becomes part of our memory, which becomes what we are, or which becomes what we like to project in both positive sense and negative sense. And negative sense meaning we like to play victim, and we like to blame something or someone for something that has happened to us. Or in a positive way, we'd like to thank somebody, we'd like to have gratitude for something or someone for something that happened to us. Either way, these are still stories. And these are only the stories out of 100% of what we have lived yesterday. Only those fragments of these memories that gathered and stayed in the conscious part of our mind. So these becomes our stories. And the mind itself is doing wonderfully, tremendously wonderfully in its full intelligence to try and filter out what is not necessary for us and to only keep what is very, very important for us to have in order for our life to continue progressing in what our mind thinks is a normal way. And if we look from this vantage point, the mind is doing everything it knows how to do, and it can do in a very, very compassionate way, full of love, to try and protect us, or to protect whoever is experiencing from within each one of us. In a way, the mind itself is trying to protect the continuation of what says I within each and every one of us. So in that sense, if we look at the development of the mind in the course of entire existence, it is a very, very complex mechanism with lots and lots of highly complex and intelligent information processing happening in order for the existence itself to continue. So whatever the mind is doing is out of compassion to help us, because there is only existentially, there is only love. There is only support for this grand continuation to happen, for this existence to keep on continuing to create itself, or go on progressing, or keep on creating this creation, which is what is happening all the time. We are in a constant process of creation. Each moment a part of our cells are being dead, and new parts of our body, different cells, are being formed, and we are unaware of that, and it simply happens, and we go unnoticed of these tiny details, tiny phenomena, and we most of the time only stay in the stories that has been going on in the mind. And this is because in an ordinary normal day, we, whoever is saying I, or the experiencer, is so much close to this surface of the mind, or this thin film into which the mind projects its thoughts. We simply become identified so much with this film that we forget that there is a certain distance between this surface, this film of the mind, and us, who is beyond that surface and witnessing and watching through that surface, the reality. So, no wonder, however the situation of the thoughts, now stories in the mind, we see the world likewise. If the surface is clouded with negative thoughts, which is simultaneously connected directly to the emotional body that we have, and when we have these negative thoughts, we have a negative experience of the surrounding. And at the same time, if we have positive thoughts, or we change ourselves by our own conscious effort, if we change the negative thoughts into the positive thoughts, the same surrounding becomes wonderful, filled of happiness or filled of playfulness. It becomes beautiful. So it is not the external reality, but it is what is happening in the film, in the surface of the mind. And because we see through that surface, the exterior world, we are bound to get colored by the color of that surface of the mind. Now, our day-to-day falling asleep, what it does is it clears the surface of the mind partially. And the stories, they will continue to get attached in this surface like smudge. It will stay there. And the next day we wake up, we see the world through that smudginess in the surface, and whatever story we have in that surface, again, we experience the world around us like that. So this is the day-to-day normal phenomenon of how we perceive the world, and how this perception of the world affects our experience in our life. And not only how the stories are moving in the mind, the surface of the mind, not only these stories define how we experience, it also defines how we project ourselves to the world. So if we are feeling sad, we project our sadness to the world, to our friends, to our families, to our loved ones. We project what we are seeing through this film. If we are experiencing and having a wonderful day, we project a wonderful feeling. And this world is exactly like a mirror. It reflects back whatever we project to the world. It is like if we go to a forest and we scream and we have an echo. Whatever we scream comes back to us, and if it's a larger space, there are multiple echoes, or just like ripples in the water. So however we project ourselves to the world, exactly that returns back to us. And whatever we project ourselves to be to the world will start seeing us in that way. And then what happens is exactly like if you have been inside a reflective room where there is a mirror everywhere, and you are in the center and you can see your reflection coming from every direction. And this is exactly what happens in the reality. Whatever we project ourselves as, the world reflects that back to us, and that we become. And the more we project the same thing to the world, and the world sees and reflects it back, the more we become that again and again and again. We go on adding up to that image that we have projected. And whatever mask we wear for the world, that mask gets reflected back at ourselves. And now, imagine this is happening to entire population of the planet. For example, I go out in the public space and I project myself in a way, and the public space will remember me of however I had projected and reflect that back at me the next time I go and meet them, because a perception has been set. So this is how our characters evolve, because in the first place we look at something around us, and the mind, what it does is it records and it plays back. So whenever we are in front of a group of people, let's say our friends or families, unknowingly, without even us being aware about it, we start copying them. We start talking like them, we start walking like them, we start acting like them. And soon we will find that we have started becoming like them. So this is how we grow as a child. We copy not only the language from our surrounding, but also how to react to something. So a child simply copies everything. And upon constant repetition of similar patterns, these patterns become characteristics of the child, which now means the child is, the way the child behaves and reacts is an outcome of that surrounding in which the child is in. And imagine this child grows up meeting different people around the world, and what goes on happening is the more the child meets many people, the more the child learns, and unknowingly lots and lots of ideas, the behavioral patterns and everything gets copied and projected. And the genuine phenomenon of the mind is that whatever it repeats more and more to itself, it starts believing that this is him or her. This is that particular mind's own generation or its own expression. So whatever we have heard again and again and again starts forming like a truth to us. It may not be in the real sense of reality true. It may be in the real sense of reality true, but we, however our mind functions, start to think that this is my idea, this is me, and exactly that we project to the world, and the world reflects us back that what we project. And there are many, many stories forming as many people we meet. And along with the stories, the way we act in front of a person changes. The many people we meet in our life, the many different way we react and act in front of each and every different particular person. And this is not only happening to us as individual, this is happening to the individual as such, to every human being around the planet. We are simply reflecting each and everyone. And there are individual reflections and there are group-based reflections and projections. An individual mind functions differently than a group mind, but that is for another day. So what we are talking about by looking into all this catching and projecting of stories of the mind is that the more stories we gather in the mind, the more we form our identities. The more we form our identities, the more heavier we become. And in normal ways, when we go to fall asleep and we wake up the next day, the body has recharged a little bit, it has gotten its rest. But the mind, we have not rested our mind since the day we were born until now, or until tomorrow, or until the day we die. And this is what meditation does, is it simply helps you rest your mind and return to the state where you are beyond these stories. And this is what my book is about as well. Whatever we are looking for is already with us. Whatever we want to become is ultimately to find a sense of peace and relaxation in life, and be for money, power, wealth, travel, relationships, anything we can name is basically to help us be in a state of relaxation and calmness and peaceful state of mind. But there's only one thing that can allow this to happen, and that is meditation, where our conscious mind, where the thoughts keep on changing and revolving and changing all the time, simply for a moment becomes silent. And that is the great rest that the mind needs, or we need, because mind as such is this flow of thought. Whatever is inside of us having the flow of thought is the mind. But we are beyond that mind. We are beyond every story that we have heard. We are beyond every stories we react upon. We are simply a very, very pure witness, just witnessing this grand happening. This existence is in the process of happening, and we are simply witnessing that. And let's not take meditation as some practice that came from the East or from some culture. That means we still formed ideas around it, and we still gathered more stories around it, and the story now is that meditation is coming from the East. And it is simply not true. It is sorry to say, but it is a very stupid idea. And that's why I focus not on a particular culture, but the very, very natural phenomenon of how the human mind functions. Which is why, again, I'm focusing on beyond stories, because cultures are a collection of stories. A family is a collection of story, a society is a collection of story, a culture is a collection of story, a nation is a collection of stories. But what is there beyond all of these collection of stories is the pure, rested, relaxed, and a very, very peaceful and blissful state of consciousness. And in the core reality, we all are that, beyond all our stories, of course. And I'm not saying stories are bad. It helps us develop, it helps us improve our lives, it helps us in creativity, it helps us greatly in enjoying our life in the planet. But we have forgotten how to rest our mind in order to actually appreciate what the stories are doing. It's like us becoming so close and close and close to a mirror that we can't see our face and we can't appreciate that we have a body. But if we have a little distance, then we see how the mirror is functioning, how the reflection is happening, and we can appreciate that. So we need a rest. We need a great rest. And meditation can provide that. It is simply a phenomenon of consciously letting the mind be however it is working. And without our prejudices, simply watching it at least few moments a day, just letting the mind be. Just like right now, you can do that. Just watch your hand. Just see it. See the lines in your palm. See the fingers. You're simply not doing anything. You are simply just watching your hand. And you can move the fingers, move the palm, and just watch. It's exactly like that we are watching our mind. Then the phenomenon, naturally what happens is that slowly it naturally, without our any effort, becomes silent. This is when the mind is dropped. This is when the baggage of the mind is dropped. Of course, the memories won't be forgotten, but whatever was gathered in the mind will not affect the individual. Rather, it helps the individual to become filled with joy and gratitude towards the way the life is built and has been developing, and the mind is playing a very, very key role in making this all happen, to the point where the mind is also helping us to let the meditation happen. Which is why I'm saying mind is not our enemy. In a very, very deep way, the mind is actually our friend, and the only friend we have. Because I cannot live the life you are living. I can't experience the way you individually experience the life. In that sense, we all are entirely unique unto ourselves. And beyond all this uniqueness, there is one common phenomena that happens, is the phenomenon of how the mind functions beyond the stories. And there may be different stories we live, each and every one of us have different stories in life. But the way the stories trigger emotion in us is the same. Whatever emotion it may be love, it may be compassion, it may be anger, it may be lust, it may be hatred, the feeling of heroism, any sorts of emotion that we can think about or we can experience is unique, and different stories trigger them. So we all are built up with these different forms of emotions, usually categorized as 9 types of rasas or 9 types of emotions. And we all inherently carry that with us. And what triggers these different forms of emotions are the stories and the way we are conditioned to be around certain stories. And that's why a certain story that you believe may trigger anger in somebody, and that particular somebody's belief may trigger anger in you, but not to that person. This is where all the political differences happen. This is where all the religious differences happen. This is where the root cause of individual to group violences occur. It's simply stories. Therefore, if we are able to individually see the phenomenon of how actually the mind is functioning, then we are beyond the mind. Then we have dropped the mind. Then we have found an individual state of a very, very relaxed, calm being. The act of being a human. So, what happens during a meditation is we simply sit, right? We just sit and we just watch. With our eyes closed, we are just watching. And again, I'm emphasizing on the phenomenon of the mind, because the way we go on watching the mind, what happens is there is a wave of thoughts. The thoughts come in, take us away, and then the thoughts come back and bring us back to this here and now, this present room where we are. Then the mind thinks, damn, I was away, I can't meditate. I was away, I brought it back, I brought my mind back, but this thought is also the mind thinking, saying itself that I can't control the mind goes away and I brought it back. But if you stay like that for a while, again, you will go into different thoughts. Now, consciously, if you catch a thought, the mind will start creating more thoughts onto that particular thought you caught, and it will keep on creating stories after stories by connecting thoughts after thoughts. And this has been helpful for humanity to develop and co-develop a world that we are living today. But just for this little while, we're just watching. And if we are not attaching ourselves to any thought, and if you find yourself attaching to any thought, just let it be. Or you can simply say, okay, I will come back to this moment. Or you can say, that is also a story, and drop it. Or you can simply say, okay, I'll drop that thought. Or simply do nothing. Because eventually again, you will come back to this room again. Even if you do something, or even if you don't do something, the way the mind functions is such that you are taken away to the stories of the thoughts and you are brought back, like a breath in and a breath out. It's like a slow expansion and compression. So you are taken away and brought back, taken away and brought back. And this keeps on happening. And at a moment, at some point, you will realize that this has been happening, that the mind is taking you away and bringing you here, and going away and bringing you here. So you are actually not going with the mind, you are just watching the mind go away and come back and think by itself that it has brought you back here. Do you see the pattern here? So then you are not that mind, you are simply there watching. And this slowly changes into a state where you can't identify what thought there had been. You will go away into the thoughts, but you cannot identify the thoughts. But you will be brought back again into this here and now, this present room, present moment, and you may be in a shock for the first time that you were away and you were there. You were not lost, you were not unconscious. You were conscious, you were watching, you were there, where you couldn't identify what was going on in the mind. This is what is happening in between the dream and this reality. In between falling asleep and going into dream and this outer reality where we are. And that state where we can't recognize what is happening around is when we simply became a witness, a pure consciousness watching without identifying anything. And the more we practice meditation, the more this state of being continues with us. And we find ourselves in a state of very, very peaceful and calmness way of living. So just like the way we let our body drop and we fall asleep every night, the phenomenon is the same. It's the same way the mind is functioning when we don't do anything in the night and we fall asleep. But while we are here meditating, what is happening is we allow the body to fall asleep, go through the same phase of the body falling asleep, of the sounds being turned off from the ears, of the visions being turned off from the eye. And for a moment, we are not here, we are not in the dream. And when we fall asleep in the night, we slowly go into the dream, but we do pass through this state where we cannot identify anything. The only difference is when we fall asleep, we go into this state unconsciously. But when we are watching, when we have the will to watch, and this is what we are doing here, we are willfully watching what happens in the mind. We are willfully watching the phenomenon of the mind. So when we willfully watch, we come to realize that the body is going asleep, that the mind is following the same pattern of going asleep in the night, but we are still there, watching. So, this is the state that will get us into an understanding of what the reality is, of understanding what this constantly happening is. And this is the state where we are no different. It starts from understanding the phenomenon of how the mind works, because it works similarly to each and every one of us. It starts from there to the core where none of us are any different. We're all the same. In a way, we can think that we have gone or dived into the roots of our being, where we are all connected as one singular entity, one singular intelligence of existing. And this is the concept of universe, or previously it would be the concept of God, where everything is at once existing. The only difference is we as human got our self-surviving tiny little intelligence separated identities from each other going on. And in the sense of the existence, this is neither good nor bad. It just is like that. So let's try to go beyond the stories. Let's try to understand our personal stories, where this story comes from. Once we understand, we realize this is not me, this is something I have gathered from somebody, unconsciously gathered, but gathered from somebody or something, or some incident we saw. Let's understand the underlying stories of the mind, and let's go beyond the stories, and let's arrive to this state of relaxation where none of us are different, but like branches of a same tree sprouting at the same time, at this point in time, being here, present, all of us together. And this is Satsang. Now, let's continue with the meditation.
Dear friends, we want to publish these life-changing conversations as a book, and for that, we need your help. Please leave your thoughts on our Facebook page, Maya Satsang, and also share this podcast with your friends. Every thought is valuable, and every share counts.